Her brothers claimed every last thing, but they overlooked the carriage house their father had left to her. If you've ever been passed over, underestimated, or written off entirely, this one belongs to you. Go ahead and hit subscribe, because what we're really talking about here is finding your own strength, not where people point you, in the places they forget exist. This isn't just my story, it's for anyone who's ever had to build a home from pieces somebody else discarded. The day I turned 18 was the day I stopped being the state of Illinois' problem. No cake, no celebration. Just a cardboard box and a handshake from the woman who'd been my caseworker for 2 years, Ms. Albright. She carried this permanently exhausted look, the kind that settles into people who spend their lives trying to hold back a flood with bare hands. She passed me a large manila envelope. Birth certificate, social security card, a final check for $175. The official goodbye package from a childhood spent inside the system. __, quote, _0, __. Her tone was flat, not cruel, just emptied out. We stood on the linoleum floor of the Grayson Group Home for Girls, a building that had reeked faintly of bleach and overcooked vegetables for every single one of the 730 days I'd spent there. The air had been scrubbed sterile, stripped of warmth, stripped of identity, same as the girls who passed through it. We learned silence, learned to shrink, learned not to occupy space. We learned that wanting anything was dangerous. "Thank you, Ms. Albright," I said. The words sat heavy on my tongue like river stones. Thank you for what, exactly? For the curfew? For those mandatory group therapy circles where every girl lied about how well she was doing? For the low, constant hum of anxiety that came from knowing you were nothing but a folder in a filing cabinet, a number on a spreadsheet? But she was a person, doing her job, and truthfully, she'd done more for me than most ever had. She'd looked at me like I was human. That counted for something. "There's a bed reserved for you at the North Side shelter," she went on, eyes scanning a clipboard that seemed fused to her hand. "Covered for 1 week. After that, you'll need to connect with their counselors about finding work. Bus tickets in the envelope." I nodded. My fingers tightened around the box handle. Everything I owned fit inside it. 3 changes of clothes. A stack of paperbacks I'd read so many times their spines had cracked apart. And 1 small framed photograph. My father and me at a county fair. He had me up on his shoulders, both of us laughing. That picture was taken a year before the sickness, 2 years before he died. 3 years before my brothers, Mark and Stephen, sold the family home and informed the state that nobody remained to look after their 15-year-old sister. __, quote, _4, __. Ms. Albright said. I was already turning to leave. She reached into a separate folder on her desk and withdrew a white business envelope. Crisp. Expensive-looking. The paper was thick and cream-colored, completely wrong for this drab, fluorescent-lit office. My name, Chloe Easton, typed cleanly across the front. __, quote, _5, __. I took it. The weight of it surprised me. Something lurched painfully behind my ribs. A law firm? The only lawyers I'd ever encountered were court-appointed ones who spoke in code and never once looked me in the eye. Any idea what it's about? She shook her head, expression blank. None. But the return address, it's from your old hometown, Barrington Hills. That name hit me like a fist. 3 years since I'd heard anyone say it out loud. A different universe. Manicured lawns stretching forever. Old money whispering through old trees. The place I came from, but had no claim to anymore. The place where my brothers still lived. Like kings in a castle they'd taken. Bitterness flooded my mouth. Whatever this letter contained, it was probably an error. Or something worse. One last bureaucratic knife from Mark and Stephen. Some formal notice cutting the final thread between us. "Okay," I managed, barely a whisper. I slipped the envelope in with the rest of my paperwork. The rest of my life's documentation. I wouldn't open it here. Whatever answer waited inside, good or gutting, I refused to let it unfold under the pale green walls of the Grayson home. "Good luck, Chloe," Ms. Albright said, and for just a moment, something genuine broke through her face. Real warmth. "You're tougher than you think." I wanted to believe that. I really did. But when I shoved that heavy front door open and walked straight into the teeth of a Chicago October, I didn't feel strong. I felt invisible. 18 years old, legally an adult, and everything I owned fit inside a cardboard box. $175 in my pocket, a one-way bus ticket to the North Side shelter. Wind cut across my face, tangling my hair, and I pulled that threadbare jacket tight around my ribs like it could hold me together. The bus stop sat 2 blocks away. Every step carried me further from anything familiar, into nothing, into blank, howling space. My fingers kept drifting to the envelope in my coat pocket. It was the only thing left I didn't understand. The bus reeked of damp wool and diesel. I dropped into a seat beside a filthy window and watched Chicago slide past. Grey concrete, grey sky, grey faces rushing somewhere that mattered. None of it had anything to do with me. 2 hours I sat like that, box on my lap. That manila envelope pressing against my chest like a stone. The shelter wasn't a destination. It was gravity. It was the floor beneath the floor. I couldn't hold out anymore. My fingers, stiff from cold, shaking from something deeper, clawed at the flap of that heavy, expensive-looking envelope. I tore it open. The letterhead read, "Henderson and Associates, Attorneys at Law." The paper was so thick, it felt like it belonged to someone else's life. I unfolded the single page and started reading. Quote, 12, it began, formal, frigid. Quote, 13. I stopped breathing. A codicil, a piece of the will carved out just for me. My father had been deteriorating for a long time before the end. His final year was a haze of painkillers and confusion. Mark and Stephen had handled all of it. They'd sat me down once, a brief, surgical meeting with some lawyer I'd never seen before, and explained that Dad's medical bills had consumed nearly everything. The house was being sold to cover what remained. They were sorry, they'd said. Faces like granite, voices like closed doors. Nothing left. That was the verdict. Absolute, final. My eyes dragged across the dense legal language. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore 15, underscore, underscore, the carriage house. At first, the words just floated there, meaningless. Then memory surfaced. I knew that building, a 2-story brick relic at the far edge of the property, swallowed by overgrown maples and oaks. The groundskeeper had kept mowers in there, bags of mulch. The upstairs was a cramped, dust-choked apartment nobody had set foot in for half a century. Crumbling. Forgotten. worthless. My brothers walked away with the 5-bedroom estate, the investment portfolios, the business Dad had built from dirt. And me? I got the shed. A laugh ripped out of me, short, jagged, mean. Of course, this was exactly the kind of cruel joke the universe had been perfecting at my expense for years. A crumb. A last insulting scrap flung from their table, probably just to satisfy some legal obligation so they could tell themselves they'd been fair. The rage hit so fast and so hot, I nearly doubled over. They had taken everything from me. They had watched me disappear into the system. 3 years in group homes, 3 years believing I was nobody's daughter, nobody's responsibility. And they had known about this property. They had to have known. The letter went on. Please be advised that the property is conveyed as is, with all associated responsibilities, including property taxes, which are currently delinquent. The trust contains no liquid assets. We advise you to contact our office at your earliest convenience to discuss the transfer of the deed and your intentions regarding the property. Sincerely, Robert Henderson, Esquire. Delinquent taxes. No money attached. Not a gift. A liability. A trap dressed up in legal stationery. They weren't giving me an inheritance. They were handing me a debt. I crushed the letter in my fist. That expensive paper fought back, refusing to fold. I pressed my forehead against the cold, rattling glass of the bus window. Tears of frustration and rage scorched the backs of my eyes. I let myself see them, just for a moment. Mark, wearing that smug, self-satisfied grin. Stephen, watching everything with those cold, calculating eyes. I could picture them perfectly, sitting in our father's leather chairs, pouring his expensive scotch, toasting their own brilliance. They hadn't simply forgotten me. They had wiped me from the record. And this letter was the final line drawn through my name. I sat like that for a long time, just holding the anger, letting it fill every hollow space inside me. It was better than the nothing. Rage, at least, was something to grip. But then, Ms. Albright's voice drifted through my skull. You're tougher than you think. Was I, though? What did tough even look like from here? Surviving another night at the shelter? Scrubbing plates at some dead-end diner? Was that the ceiling of my entire existence? Slowly, I sat up straight, smoothed the crumpled letter flat against my knee, read it again, slower this time, word by word. Pursuant to your father's directive, not my brother's, my father. He had written this into his will. He had done this deliberately. For me. Why? Why leave me a broken-down garage in the middle of nowhere? It didn't add up. Unless there was something underneath. A man who carried me on his shoulders, who taught me to read before I started school, who called me his little spark plug because I never stopped asking questions. That man would not set up a cruel joke as his final act, would he? I pulled out the cheap flip phone Miss Albright had given me, my lifeline, loaded with 100 prepaid minutes. I dialed the law firm number printed on the letterhead. A long shot, but I needed answers. A polished, professional voice picked up. Quote 19. Quote 20. I managed, my voice barely there. Quote 21. Quote. Silence on the line. I braced for the brush-off. A transfer to some junior associate, a promise that someone would call back. Instead, the receptionist said, quote, _22. Quote. Seconds later, a calm, resonant voice filled my ear. Quote 23. Quote 24. I said. My knuckles were white around the phone. Quote 25. Quote 26. The sound of my first name, spoken so gently, so naturally, knocked me sideways. Quote 27. Quote 28, I said. The word tasted like ash in my mouth. Quote 29. Another pause, not the dismissive kind, the kind where someone is choosing their words with care. Quote 30. Mr. Henderson said at last. Quote 31. A beat. Quote 32. Find things. What was that supposed to mean? It sounded like sentimental nonsense, the kind of warm, vague phrase people toss around. Not a legal strategy. Find what exactly? Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, 33, underscore, underscore. Mr. Henderson replied, his tone steady as a pulse. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, 34, underscore, underscore. A hidden key. A cryptic message from a dead man. It felt ripped from the pages of a fantasy novel, not from my actual life. It was absurd. It was also the first thing all day that wasn't despair. It was a thread, thin, fragile, but real, in a world that had felt like nothing but smooth, blank wall. The taxes, I said, a tremor in my voice. How much? 2 years' worth. Roughly $800. My chest caved. $800. It might as well have been $1 million. I would never scrape together that kind of money. So I'll lose it regardless. Not necessarily, he said. The county issues a final notice. You'll have 90 days to pay before they seize the property and send it to auction. 90 days, Chloe. He said it without menace, like a fact, like a deadline drawn in the dirt, like a dare. The bus groaned into the depot, end of the line. I stared through the glass at that grey, lifeless station. I could step off this bus right now, walk to the shelter, pretend none of this was real. I could toss that letter in the trash and let the carriage house, the last fragment of my father on this earth, get sold off to some faceless bidder. Or I could do something terrifying. I could board the northbound bus, the one heading back toward Barrington Hills, back toward the only thing in this world with my name on it. Thank you, Mr. Henderson, I said. The decision was crystallizing inside me, equal parts terror and electricity, like standing at the edge of a cliff and choosing to leap. For what? He asked. For the information, I said. I'll be in touch. I ended the call, grabbed my box, grabbed my envelope, stepped off the bus. I didn't head toward the exit that would take me to the shelter. I walked straight to the ticket counter, my heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, 47, underscore, underscore. I asked the woman behind the glass. She looked me over. The threadbare jacket, the cardboard box. Pity flickered across her face before she could hide it. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, 48, underscore, underscore. I peeled the bills from my envelope, each one crisp and untouched. That money was a massive piece of everything I had in the world. When she slid the ticket under the partition, raw fear hit me like a wall. This was insane. Walking back into enemy territory with no strategy and almost nothing to my name. But for the first time in 3 years, I wasn't drifting. I wasn't being shuffled from one holding pen to another. I was choosing. I was going home. Or at least, to the broken remains of what someone had left me. The ride to Barrington Hills felt like rewinding a clock. Chicago's tight, grey sprawl loosened into wide suburbs, then dissolved into the manicured perfection of old money. Houses swelled in size, lawns stretched wider, Trees stood older, taller, rooted deeper than anything in my life had ever been. Every mile was a wound. I remembered these roads from my father's pickup truck. Windows down, classic rock on the radio. He would gesture at houses and spin the histories of the families inside. Our family had been one of those stories once. Now, I was a ghost drifting along the margins. The bus left me at a small station in the center of town. Quaint storefronts, expensive boutiques, cobblestone charm. I stuck out like a stain, my cardboard box announcing everything about me I couldn't hide. The Eastern Estate sat 2 miles from the station. 2 miles I had to walk, part pilgrim, part beggar. Memories ambushed me with every block. The park, where Dad ran behind my bicycle, my knees bloody, my grin unstoppable. The ice cream shop he'd take me to after a report card worth celebrating. Then I turned onto Oakhaven Lane, and there it was, bigger than I remembered, more imposing. My brothers had poured money into it. Fresh white paint, glossy black shutters, landscaping trimmed to surgical precision. A brand new black BMW gleaming in the circular drive. It looked like a magazine spread, sterile, lifeless. Every trace of the warm chaos my father had built was gone. No muddy boots by the door, no half-finished projects cluttering the porch. This was their house now, not mine. My destination lay around the side, down a long gravel path choked with overgrowth. I shoved through tangled branches and soaking leaves. Wild rose thorns snagged my jacket,
dragging at me like warnings.
Then I saw it. The carriage house sat in its own pocket of abandonment, a forgotten afterthought. Dark brick swallowed by ivy, a slate roof bowing in the center, second-floor windows sealed behind plywood. Exactly the ruin Mr. Henderson had described, a monument to being discarded. And it was mine. My hands trembled as I circled to the back. There, right where he'd told me, the electrical meter. I reached behind it. Fingertips found cold metal, a small, black, magnetic box. It clicked free in my grip. Inside, cradled in disintegrating foam, lay a single brass key. Old-fashioned, heavy, ornate. Nothing like the modern locks on the main house. This key belonged to another era, my father's era. I drew one long breath and walked to the heavy wooden door on the building's side. The key slid into the lock with a rough, grating sound. The lock fought me, seized up from years of neglect. I drove my shoulder into the turn, every ounce of strength behind it. A deep, metallic clunk echoed through the space as the bolt finally gave way. The door groaned inward, revealing nothing but black. The smell reached me before anything else. Damp earth. Rot. Time compressed into something thick and physical. The smell of a place that had been holding its breath for years. I froze on the threshold, pulse slamming in my ears. Every nerve screamed at me to walk away. This was a place where things ended, not where they began. But the key sat warm against my palm. A promise. He said you always knew how to find. I crossed the threshold. The ground floor matched my memory, only worse, more cluttered, more decomposed. This had been the garage, the workshop. Rusted gardening tools slouched against the walls. Stacks of cracked terracotta pots sat beneath a thick skin of dust and cobwebs. Pale light struggled through filthy windows, outlining 2 old stalls, horse stalls from a century ago. The air hung cold and motionless. A tomb.
My inheritance
Was a tomb. Despair rolled through me like a wave I'd felt 1,000 times before. What was I doing here? This was a mistake, a cruel, hollow joke. The father I remembered would never have left me this. Maybe my brothers had been right all along. Maybe he'd lost his mind at the end.
Maybe he didn't love me the way I thought he did.
That thought cut, sharp, deep, physical. I found a rickety wooden staircase tucked into the corner. It led up to the old apartment on the second floor. I tested the first step with my foot. It groaned beneath me, but held. One careful step at a time, I climbed. My hand dragged along the splintered railing, collecting dust. The apartment was small, 2 rooms and a cramped bathroom. Somehow worse than the garage below. The furniture looked like cast-offs from the main house. A lumpy sofa in faded floral fabric. A wobbly kitchen table paired with a single chair. A rusted metal bed frame, bare, no mattress. Dust coated everything uniformly, like snowfall. A dead bird rested on the windowsill. I walked into the main room and dropped my cardboard box. The thud echoed off bare walls. I turned a slow circle in the center of the room. This was it. My legacy. A forgotten attic stuffed with junk. $800 in back taxes. A mountain with no summit. My week at the shelter was already bleeding away. Nearly a quarter of my savings. Gone. Spent reaching this dead end. I lowered myself onto the filthy sofa without caring. Buried my face in my hands. And for the first time since leaving the group home,
I let it come.
not loud, not dramatic, quiet, hopeless. I cried for my father, for the little girl who lost him, for the teenager her brothers threw away, for the young woman sitting in a condemned building with nothing ahead of her and nothing behind. Time dissolved. The light beyond the grimy windows thinned as afternoon bled toward evening. The room turned colder. Eventually the tears just stopped. What replaced them was worse. A hollow ache, empty and enormous. I was spent. Spent from the fighting, spent from the hoping, spent from being let down. I stretched out on the sofa, pulling my thin jacket tight around my body. Maybe I'd sleep here tonight.
Better than a shelter, wasn't it?
At least here, the failure belonged only to me. As I shifted my weight, my elbow struck the floor beside the sofa. A strange sound came back. Thump. Thump. Not the solid response of the rest of the floor, something different. I sat up. My heart stuttered. I knocked again, knuckles against old wood. Thump. Solid. I moved a few inches over. Hollow. A small section, maybe 2 feet square, pressed right against the sofa's edge. My fingers traced the boards. They looked identical to every other plank, darkened with age, gaps packed with grime. But one board, right at the edge, gave slightly under pressure. I dug my nails into the crack and pulled. Nothing moved. I scanned the room. In a pile of junk in the corner, an old, rusted tire iron. I grabbed it, heavy, solid, real in my grip. I went back to the spot and worked the flat end into the crack, leaned my full weight against it. The wood groaned.
Then it cracked.
Sharp and sudden, and the board split free. My pulse hammered so loud it drowned out everything else. I shoved the broken plank aside and stared down into the gap beneath the floor. a shallow cavity, hidden for God knows how long. Sitting inside, wrapped in weathered oilcloth, was a dark green metal box. Military surplus, an old ammo can, dense and solid. My hands wouldn't stop shaking as I reached in and hauled it out. Heavier than I expected. I set it down and brushed the grime from the lid. No padlock, just two heavy-duty latches across the front. I drew a long, unsteady breath, thoughts spinning out in every direction. What was this? What had Dad buried underneath this floor? My fingers fumbled with the latches. They snapped open, two sharp metallic clicks that echoed through the silence. I raised the lid. Cash. That was the first thing. Bundles and bundles of it, not fresh bills from a bank drawer, old, soft hundreds held together with rubber bands, the kind that had passed through 1,000 hands. It wasn't the kind of fortune Mark and Stephen had walked away with. But it was more money than I'd ever touched in my entire life. I picked up one bundle. The weight of it felt impossible. Tens of thousands of dollars at least. Enough to cover the taxes, enough to survive for months, maybe a full year. Enough to begin again. But beneath the cash, something else waited. A large envelope, thick and formal, made from heavy cream-colored paper, identical to the stationery from Henderson and Associates. My name, Chloe, written across the front in Dad's slightly crooked hand. That scrawl I would have recognized anywhere. Beside it, a smaller, heavier envelope stamped with a wax seal. The letter E, our family initial. I pushed the money to one side. The cash was staggering, a miracle I couldn't process.
But something deeper than thought
Told me it wasn't the real inheritance. The real inheritance was folded inside this envelope. This was the answer. This was the why. My fingers trembled as I cracked the wax on the larger envelope and pulled out a thick stack of pages, 20 at least, every one covered edge to edge in my father's handwriting. I unfolded the first sheet and started reading. "My dearest Chloe," it began, "my little spark plug. If you are reading this, it means several things. It means you are 18. It means you are strong enough and clever enough to have found this place and this box. And it means I am gone. I am so sorry that I had to leave you. There is not a day that goes by, as I write this, that my heart doesn't break, knowing I will not see you grow into the incredible woman I know you will become." The letters swam. Tears blurred everything. I dragged my sleeve across my eyes. I had to keep going. "I know you must have so many questions. I know you must be angry and confused. You must feel abandoned. I need you to know, Chloe, that none of it was what it seemed. Leaving you was the hardest thing I have ever had to do, but I did it to protect you, not from the world, from your brothers." The words hung in the dust-filled air. Protect me, from Mark and Stephen. "I loved all my children," the letter continued, "but I was not blind. I saw the greed in Mark and Stephen long before I got sick. They saw my business, my house, my money, not as a family legacy, but as a prize to be won. When I got my diagnosis, I knew I didn't have much time. I also knew that if I left you a traditional inheritance, a share of the money or the estate, they would have found a way to take it from you. They would have used their age, their lawyers, their ruthlessness to bleed you dry and leave you with nothing. They would have trapped you in their world of fighting and bitterness, and it would have destroyed your spirit. I could not let that happen." I sank back against the wall, pages quaking in my grip. A horrible clarity was settling over everything. He hadn't forgotten me. He hadn't thrown me away. He had hidden me.
So, I made a plan.
He wrote. A difficult, painful plan. I set up this carriage house in a separate trust, a legal fortress they couldn't touch. I made it look worthless, a piece of junk not worth fighting over. I left the taxes unpaid to make it seem like a liability. I liquidated some assets quietly over time. The cash in this box is that money. It's your start, Chloe. Clean. Untraceable. Enough to give you freedom. I had to let the state take you in. I had to let you think you had nothing. It was the only way to get you clear of the wreckage when the estate was settled. That was the only way to guarantee your brothers wouldn't come searching. Not for you, not for what was yours. I chose a lawyer I could depend on, my old friend Robert Henderson. I gave him precise instructions. He would be my messenger. Nothing beyond that. The rest had to come from you. I had to believe the smart,
Curious girl I raised.
would find her way here eventually. I had to believe you would find this box. I set the letter down. My head was spinning. For 3 years, I had carried a story of abandonment like a stone in my chest. I had believed my father's illness had wiped me from his memory, that my brother's greed had wiped me from the family entirely. But the truth was so much more layered than that, so much more painful, and so much more saturated with love than anything I could have constructed in my worst or best imagination. He had engineered my time in the system. He had allowed me to suffer, to feel invisible, all of it to keep me safe. That knowledge landed on me like a collapsing wall and an open door at the same time. Crushing weight, profound relief, both at once, neither cancelling the other. I cried again. But these tears weren't for me. They were for him, for the impossible choice he'd been forced to make. After a few minutes, I picked the letter back up.
There was more.
The cash will give you a fresh start, Sparkplug. You can go anywhere, be anyone. You owe this family nothing. But I've left you something else. A choice. Inside the smaller envelope is the real Eastern legacy. And it is a heavy one. My eyes moved to the smaller envelope, sealed in wax, dense in my hand.
Solid.
For the last 2 years of my life, the letter went on, while your brothers were so busy managing my failing business, they were also systematically looting it. Shell corporations, falsified invoices, millions funneled into offshore accounts, all while telling me the company was collapsing under the weight of my medical bills. They were draining me dry, running out the clock until I died. But I wasn't as far gone as they assumed. I found it, Chloe. I found their trail. The small envelope contains everything. Copies of the wire transfers, the fabricated invoices, the names of the shell companies, a ledger documenting every dollar they siphoned. It's all there. Enough evidence to put them both behind bars for a very long time, and to reclaim the entire family fortune through the courts. I stared at that small envelope like it might detonate. Millions. He was talking about millions of dollars, the main house, the business.
Everything.
So this is your choice, my father's letter concluded. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, 61. Underscore, underscore. The letter slipped from my fingers. The room went silent. Nothing but my own jagged breathing filling the space. The air felt thick, dense with the weight of the decision he had just placed at my feet. Peace or justice? Walk away or wage war? He had handed me a clean beginning and a blade, then told me to choose. For one burning moment, Rage flooded everything, white hot. I wanted justice. I wanted to watch the smugness drain from my brothers' faces. I wanted them to lose everything the way I had. I wanted their pristine, manicured world reduced to ash. My fingers found the small envelope, traced the wax seal. I could do it. Walk into the nearest police station and end them. Take back the house, the money, the life that should have been mine all along. But then I thought about what that life would actually look like. Years consumed by depositions and courtrooms. My name, my trauma, scattered across the local news. I would be shackled to them, to their greed and their crimes, for years, maybe longer. I would become the fight against them. That would be my identity. My father's words circled back. It will consume you. He had gone to such extraordinary lengths to cut me free. Would going to war with them just be a different kind of cage? I stood in the middle of that crumbling apartment and let the truth settle over me. This was my inheritance. Not the cash in the box, not the damning papers in that envelope. It was this moment, this crossroads, the power to choose what came next. My father hadn't simply left me money, he'd left me a final lesson about what freedom actually means. Freedom isn't abundance.
It's agency.
I sat there for hours while the light drained from the sky and the room folded itself into cold, heavy darkness. Two roads pressed against my chest like stones. I thought about the girl in the group home, the one who taught herself to shrink, to vanish. I thought about the rage that had ridden beside me on that bus like the only friend I'd ever known. Was that the person I intended to become? Someone whose entire identity was built from wounds? Or was there something else waiting on the other side of all that pain? What would you have done? Sit with that for a moment. If you've stayed with this story this long, something in it is touching a nerve. Have you ever stood at the fork between revenge and release? That's not a simple question. Tell me in the comments what you think the right answer is. Justice or peace? Your response matters, because this community exists for exactly these impossible crossroads. And if this means something to you, please consider subscribing. Now, back to that dusty room. Moonlight crept across the floor in pale rectangles, and a strange stillness moved through me. The anger had burned itself out. What replaced it was a deep, aching sorrow, and then something beyond sorrow, clarity. My father never wanted me to be a fighter. He had no choice but to fight, against his illness, against the forces circling me. What he wanted was for me to be a builder. That envelope full of evidence wasn't a sword he was handing down. It was a weight he was giving me permission to drop. The real gift was never about reclaiming the past. It was about constructing a future with nothing hanging over it. Mark and Stephen had already consumed 3 years of my life. I refused to surrender another second. The decision crystallized. I would not open the second envelope. I would not contact the police. I would not wage war. Their crimes and their hollow souls, that was their cage, not mine. They could rot in that oversized house with their stolen dollars. They could have every cent. My inheritance wasn't behind those walls. It was right here, in this neglected, dust-choked carriage house. A blank page. I slept on the bare floor that night, my jacket bunched under my head, the ammo box pressed against my side. It was the deepest sleep I'd had in years. Dawn woke me. The air bit cold against my skin, but I couldn't feel it.
What I felt instead
Was purpose, pure and unfamiliar, running through me like current. In the corner, I found a small, rusted wood-burning stove. I picked up the heavy envelope, the one stuffed with every shred of evidence against my brothers, and placed it inside the stove's belly. Then I lifted my father's letter, read it one final time, folded it with care, laid it on top of the envelope. A few splinters from the broken floorboards served as kindling. I had no matches, but the ammo box held one last secret. Tucked into a narrow pocket in the lid, an old Zippo lighter, bone dry, but the flint still had life in it. 3 tries. 4. Then a spark caught the paper's edge. Flames curled around the envelope first, then reached for my father's words. I watched it all go. The fury, the vengeance, the past. Smoke and ash climbed the rusted stovepipe and dissolved into morning sky. I was free. After that, things began to move. First stop, the county office.
My heart hammered the whole walk there.
I counted out $800 in cash from the box and slid it across the counter for back taxes. The clerk gave me a look I couldn't quite read, but she took the money and stamped my receipt. That fast, the biggest threat evaporated. The carriage house belonged to me. No liens, no debts, no strings. My next move was calling Mr. Henderson. Quote 62. Quote, he said, voice steady as a resting pulse. Quote 63. Quote 64. Quote, my own voice surprised me. How even it sounded. Silence filled the line. I could hear him breathing. I'm not sure I was breathing at all. I see, he said at last. Then, quieter, almost gentle, your father would be very proud of you, Chloe. He hoped you would choose peace. Tears burned at the corners of my eyes. He told you that? He told me he was leaving you a choice, Mr.
Henderson said,
and that he trusted you to make the right one, for you. Now, regarding the deed, it's already in your name, but the property line has to be formally surveyed and severed from the main lot your brothers own. Simple legal procedure. Your father prepaid for it through the trust. I'll file everything today. And like that, the last thread was cut. My little 1/10 of an acre became its own sovereign territory. The weeks that followed were the hardest and finest of my life. I spent the cash from the box carefully. A cheap mattress, a sleeping bag, basic cleaning supplies. Then I threw myself into the enormous work of gutting the carriage house. Bag after bag of trash came out. Decades of accumulated neglect. I scrubbed floors on my hands and knees, washed every window, patched the leaking roof with tar from the local hardware store. The owner, a gruff old man named Sal, watched me walk in day after day. Sandpaper, paint, nails. He never asked a single question. But one afternoon, while I stood there puzzling over which plumbing fixture would fit the ancient sink, he walked over. Old compression fitting, he grunted, pointing. You're not going to find one. Got to replace the whole trap. Here, take this. He pushed a new PVC set into my hands. No charge. Welcome to the neighborhood. I couldn't speak, just nodded. It was the first act of unsolicited kindness I'd received from a stranger in years. Slowly, the carriage house began to change. I painted those grimy walls a warm, creamy white, sanded the wooden floors, sealed them, coaxed out a warmth nobody knew was hiding underneath. Found a used armchair at a thrift store for $20 and set it by the window.
it wasn't a palace.
Small, quirky, still a little broken in places, but every square inch belonged to me. I never saw my brothers. Sometimes their expensive cars drifted past the end of the lane, but they never turned down the overgrown path. To them, the carriage house remained invisible, a worthless ruin. They had no idea I was living there, quiet and unseen, at the edge of their kingdom. That was fine by me. I was building my own. One evening, a knock at my door. I froze. Nobody ever knocked on my door. I peered through the window. A woman stood on my doorstep, holding a casserole dish. My nearest neighbor, Mrs. Gable, from the house across the street. She said, smiling warmly when I opened the door. I took the dish. Warmth spread through my palms. Chicken and rice. It smelled like heaven. I whispered. My voice barely held together. She said, "That night, I ate a home-cooked meal at my wobbly kitchen table. In my own home. And I knew, deep in my bones, I had made the right choice. My father hadn't just left me a house and some money. He'd left me a community I could choose to belong to. Months passed, then a year. The carriage house became a home. I got a part-time job at the town library, quiet, peaceful, perfectly suited to me. My free hours went into the house, into the small patch of land outside. I planted flowers where only weeds had grown. I was careful with the money my father left, not a windfall, a foundation, seed from which I was growing an entirely new life. I thought often about what inheritance really means. I used to believe it was money, property, the things handed down. I was wrong. My brothers got the assets and inherited the poison with them, trapped in a life built on a lie, always glancing over their shoulders. They had the mansion. I had the home. My real inheritance was never the carriage house or the cash. It was the story my father left behind, the understanding that abandonment can be protection, that loss can arrive disguised as a gift, that the most valuable thing a parent passes down isn't wealth, it's wisdom. He taught me that true strength has nothing to do with how hard you fight. It's about what you choose to build. He'd released my grip so I could find my own footing. The carriage house wasn't a ruin anymore. Patched roof, clean windows, ivy cut back to expose that gorgeous old brick underneath. It stood there, defiant, upright, proof that broken things can earn a second life. It was me, rendered in mortar and stone. I'd taken something forgotten, something crumbling, and I'd poured every ounce of sweat and stubborn love into its bones. I'd made it whole, and somewhere in that work, I'd made myself whole too. Standing at the window now, the same window that once cradled a dead bird, I see a small garden pushing up through the soil, alive, green, reaching. I see a home I constructed, not from an inheritance of wealth, from an inheritance of character. My father handed me a choice. I chose peace. I chose to build. That single decision changed everything. This story, my story, is proof that what looks like an ending is sometimes a beginning, wearing a disguise. It's about finding worth where nobody else bothers to look, about assembling a future from scraps the world discarded. We don't get to pick what life hands us. We don't choose the family we land in or the losses that gut us along the way. But we choose what we do with what remains. We can let the past own us, or we can lay new foundations on the bedrock of our own strength. So I'm asking you something. Look at your life. Really look.
What's your carriage house?
What's the overlooked, underestimated, half-broken thing that might hold the key to your freedom? Tell me in the comments. Fill this space with stories of resilience, stories of hope found in the last place you expected. Your story matters, and if mine has meant something to you tonight, subscribe. Be part of this. We're all just trying to find our way home. Maybe we can help each other by sharing our maps. Thank you for listening.